The main takeaway of this video is it doesn't make sense to be a cynic, and it takes greater strength and virtue to approach situations with a spirit and people with a spirit of true goodwill rather than being a cynic. There's a balance there between being a naive fool who's going to get burned and being a cynic who's just suspicious of everyone. So that's the main takeaway. I'm going to be talking about anime. We're going to be talking about why Gen Z has embraced anime. We're going to be talking about Vinland Saga, the history behind that, and why it's worth watching, why we should be in the loop with this kind of stuff. So hear me out. So first we start out when we're young as naive little lads, you know, we're just children running around the yard, nothing to worry about. But at a certain point, oftentimes what happens is we learn a hard lesson that we live in kind of a fallen world. We might get betrayed by someone that we know, or we might get hurt or injured. Someone might hurt us, and it's easy to shell up and become cynical. It's good to be idealistic and youthful, but at a certain point you have to realize that humans are capable of evil, including yourself, and that we live in a fallen world because of original sin. It says so in the Bible. And so it's better to have lower expectations of people, because people will disappoint you, because you've been let down, you've been backstabbed before. And it's easier to just have lower expectations of people, but at the same time just be pleased when people do actually act virtuously, because that's not the default of this world. So it's easy to be kind of like a cynic, but one thing I've realized recently is that there's another level beyond that, transcending cynicism. And it's basically trying to approach everything with goodwill despite that negativity. And it's a very Christian theme. You know, it says so in the gospel, Luke 6, chapter 2. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that for you? So there's another level that is unique to Christians, loving your enemies. What does that really mean? You've probably heard that, but Vinland Saga Season 2, it really illustrates that idea. There has been this I have no enemies trend on TikTok recently. All these Zoomers are getting into anime, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but I think it's a good thing, because Vinland Season 2 is kind of exploring this Christian idea of loving your enemies. I have no enemies, and it's actually very practical the way that you approach things. So first I'll talk about Gen Z and anime. So why exactly are all these Zoomers getting into anime? It's because Western media doesn't tell very good stories anymore. Like postmodern, like Netflix shows, they're just not good. But anime and manga, there's a lot of really good stories there. What people don't realize is that there is different genres of anime. There's like the movies, like the Studio Ghibli movies, like Spirited Away or My Neighbor Totoro. There is shonen genre, which means young boy. That's One Piece, Naruto, Bleach, Dragon Ball Z. There's seinen, which is more serious. It means like man, like Berserk, Vinland Saga, Attack on Titan, Vagabonds. There's slice of life, which is less serious. It's about normal life and romance. There is the isekai genre, which I'm kind of against. Is kind of like about escapism. It's like you're escaping into a video game world or something. I think that's not a good genre. And then there's all the perverted, like sexual stuff, which most people associate with all of anime, which is clearly evil. But you gotta differentiate between these different genres of anime. And I think there's some good themes, even Christian themes, in some of them. So I personally have been watching anime since I turned 14. I started out with Naruto, and I think it's been very fruitful. It's inspired me. It's taught me a lot about masculinity. It's taught me a lot about morality, and it's inspired me more than anything to get into lifting weights, get into many different things. In fact, I was in the jiu-jitsu gym locker room like a week ago, and there's some guy in there, and he had a Naruto shirt. I was like, hey, is that a Naruto shirt? And he was like, yeah, and we started talking about it. And then there was like several other dudes in there who also started talking about anime and manga. And there's even some dude like who was like taking a shower, and he was like, oh yeah, like I've read Vinland Saga. Have you heard of like Jujutsu Kaisen? Have you heard of Attack on Titan? And it was cool. I mean, it made me realize that maybe there's an overlap between jujitsu people and people who like to watch anime. But anyways, it's basically mainstream. So Vinland Saga Season 2, it's on Netflix right now. It's been very popular, and it's good. It's got good themes. It was written, let me tell you a little bit about what it is. So it was written originally by Makoto Yukimura, who's the mangaka, and he wrote the manga for it. It is a historical fiction. Obviously, there's some things that are not historically accurate, but there is some good, actually historical things. It's about the Vinland Sagas. Are actually, there is the saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Erik the Red. And these are these ancient Icelandic texts written in the 13th century. And the Vinland Sagas are those two together. And it's about Leif Erikson and how he discovered the New World like 500 years before Columbus did. And he basically went to Canada. And people were skeptical for a while that they actually did make it, but they did find archaeological evidence in the past 100 years in Canada that the Scandinavians really did make it to Newfoundland, New Brunswick, and the Gulf of St. Lawrence way earlier, like in around 1000 AD. And this was around the time this was during the Viking era, so the Scandinavia was Christianized between the 8th and 12th centuries, and the place where Vinland Saga takes place is between the 10th and the 11th century. So this was the era during when King Canute, who is actually a character in Vinland Saga, he was the first king to unite England, Denmark, and Norway. He created the North Sea Empire. He was considered a great king. This is after the time of Albert the Great. And there are some real historical figures who are characters in the show. So you learn history just from watching this / reading it. There's Leif Erikson, Erik the Red, Thorkel the Tall, King Canute, and then the main character who's Thorfinn Karlsefni. And that's what the story follows his life. And so historically, Thorfinn, he followed the route of Leif Erikson, and he established a temporary colony called Vinland. And Vinland means Vineland, or it's the place of wine because they found grapevines there. So that's why it's called Vinland. Thorfinn was descended historically from Bjorn Ironside, who was descended from Ragnar. I don't know if you've seen Vikings, that show, but it's interesting that he is descended from Bjorn Ironside. And some of the events are not accurate for sure. Like there's some characters that probably didn't exist, and there's a lot of embellishments, but I think there's some really good ideas that are explored in that show. And it talks a lot about, you learn a lot of history, and it's just an interesting time period too, because it's kind of like you've got the Christians, you've got the pagans, the Norse pagans, and there's kind of like these different clashing ideologies during this era. For example, season 2 kind of attacks the idea of Valhalla. Like fighting in war is glorified and you want to die in battle, and it's kind of attacking this idea how it's just like an endless cycle of war, the idea of Valhalla. And also there's an old man character in season 2 who he literally is talking about the Sermon on the Mount, and so the gospel is like explicitly explained in one of the episodes, and the main character Thorfinn is influenced by it. A brief overview of the story. So Thorfinn, he's this young boy, and then his father gets killed by Vikings, and then he goes on a revenge quest for years, and he becomes a child soldier, and he kills a bunch of people, and but then eventually he kind of repents, and he becomes a slave on this farm. That's what season 2 is about. And he's kind of like existentially trying to atone for his sins. He's realizing that the evil of what's going on with like the war and the Viking lifestyle, and he basically wants to atone for all the people that he's killed. So there's a moment at the end of season 2, which is I have no enemies, and I don't want to spoil it too much because you'll have to watch it for yourself. I'd highly recommend it. It's on Netflix, or read the manga too. I'm all caught up. And basically, what I said at the beginning of the video, that's what it's about. He basically realizes that he's able to like defuse this giant war through nonviolent means, but it's only because he's strong enough to do so. Like he's a skilled warrior, and then he basically like renounces violence, and he's only able to do so because he is strong enough to do so. And I personally believe in the just war doctrine of St. Augustine of Hippo. So if you read the book of Maccabees, clearly there is a time and place to fight. I think we should train and prepare for the worst. We should be ready to go to war if necessary, but it should be a last resort. And so I think what I learned and took away from the I have no enemies moments of that show is that we should not approach situations with a sense of suspicion and negativity from the get-go. We should approach things with a sense of goodwill. And it's kind of like when someone's like coming at you with anger or kind of trying to prove something. If you react in the same way, then it just kind of becomes like a cycle of violence. And he's trying to prevent this cycle of violence from happening. Like this, you killed my father, therefore I'm going to kill you. Oh, you killed my friend. And it just becomes like a tribal warfare that just never ends. It's like an endless spiral of antagonism and fighting. So it says in the gospel, be as sly as a serpent but as gentle as a dove. So we have to not be naive. That way we don't get backstabbed by people. But at the same time, we should try to create win-win situations. We should try to transcend cynicism and not approach people in situations with too much suspicion and cynicism and fear, because that comes from a place of fear. You know, we should train and be as strong as possible, but then at the same time, we should try to give people the benefit of the doubt from the get-go, even if we understand that they may betray us later. So that is kind of my thought. And the manga, it's really interesting. So where it's at, he basically has made it to Vinland, and now they're interacting with these Native American tribes who are peaceful initially, but it's like things are beginning to escalate because people are suspicious. Some, like the Nordics, they are suspicious of the Native Americans, and there's just a few people who are very suspicious and fearful of the other groups, and it's beginning to spiral out of control. And so it's just like, how do you prevent things from escalating? How do you diffuse situations of pointless conflict and violence? You know, the devil wants to divide us. So yeah, I don't know. I just think it's just like a very useful frame to view things through. I used it the other day. I was in jiu-jitsu, and my partner, he was kind of spazzing out on me, not gonna lie. He was kind of going too hard, and he cared more about kind of doing things powerfully and strongly rather than trying to be kind of goodwill and trying to practice the technique. And I started getting annoyed, but then I instead tried to diffuse things, and I tried to just be humble, and I tried to kind of diffuse things, and then he kind of matched my energy, and he kind of lowered and calmed down. So I think that's what we got to do. So comment if you agree or disagree. This painting in my background, this is Thomas Cole. It's a series of 4 paintings, and it's about the cycle of life. Like there's the idealistic youth, the child, and it's kind of the cycle of life. So I'd highly recommend Thomas Cole. I really like the Romanticism style painting, and I hope this was of value to you guys. So talk to you later.